Hello everyone. Today we are doing the breakdown for Lucy Cavendish Oracle decks. This has been highly requested by you all, and it kind of really beautifully creates a nice trilogy of female created Oracle and Tarot decks. And these these three very prolific Oracle deck creators with very distinct views and it hopefully gives you all jumping off points in what you want to bring into your collection and what you feel really good not having in your collection. So I'm going to start just as I did with Alana's breakdown video by talking a little bit about how you might want to work with Lucy's deck. So when it comes to working with her decks, Lucy identifies as a witch. Her Oracle decks definitely have a leaning towards pagan paths. However, you don't have to follow a pagan path to work with her decks. Lucy is also very clear in no uncertain terms that she feels like you should be reading her Oracle guidebooks and interpreting the cards with those guidebook meanings. She's not necessarily on the same boat with a lot of people who just read intuitively. She does feel like there are specific meanings, that the decks have very specific voices, and that they were created for those guidebook meanings to be honored. So this is something to be aware of when it comes to reading her decks. I would say you want to at least give the guidebook a nice once over anyhow before you start reading with a deck, but I think especially with hers, it is important to read the guidebooks. Now, I just want to speak about her guidebooks. In general, Lucy's guidebooks are wonderful. Not as content heavy as Alana, but more information and wisdom and guidance than Colette's decks. So you're going to get plenty of bang for your buck from her guidebooks. Her guidebooks can be a little confusing in one way. She often has a paragraph or two or a section or two about the cards and then the divination meanings, which often differ wildly from the about section. So when you go to read the guidebook, you do kind of need to read it all the way through. At least this is what I've found helpful. And pay attention to the differences in the about aspect versus the divination aspect, because sometimes for me, the guidebook meaning in the about will apply more than in the divination, and vice versa when I'm reading for myself. Now let's talk about how you might want to use Lucy's decks. I love Lucy's decks for clarifying decks and tarot readings. They are amazingly accurate, spot on in like identifying and clarifying anything in a reading I need to put a spotlight on as the reader. And I definitely have my favorites for that, and I will absolutely be addressing that as I continue on in the breakdown. What else did I want to say with that? That being said, they are more in alignment with Alana's decks insofar as I do feel that they're very much focused on your spiritual path and empowering you on your path. Lucy is also very environmentally conscious, and that is absolutely a part of each and every one of her decks. And it's something that you want to be aware of, that you're a part of when you read with her decks, and you're definitely going to hear about that in the guidebooks themselves as well. As I said, wonderful as clarifying decks. I can't say enough good things about that. And also really beautiful for your spiritual path. You're getting a wealth of information in those guidebooks that are really going to help, help you to trust your path and your guides, connect in with guides, and get clear messages about, what higher self and your physical self and all of those realms together have to say to you on any given day. So I would definitely say that Lucy's decks are kind of like the middle point between the spectrum of like Colette or Alana. So you have like light and fluffy, and then really intense, and then in between you have Lucy, and she's a really nice middle ground there. The artwork, let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to break down the list of decks, but she has quite a few different, well, not quite a few, but at least a few different artists in her decks. I would say a larger amount of the ones that I'm going to talk about do feature artwork by Jasmine Beckett Griffith, and so if you don't like this type of artwork, then not all of her decks may be for you. So we're going to do a breakdown of her Oracle decks. This was actually surprisingly hard for me to find, the list of Oracle decks. So I've just resorted to an Amazon search because it was just getting to be too much for me and trying to find her actual website. I don't know, she's got some interesting stuff going on online. So this is not going to be in chronological order, but I'm going to tell you what I have and what I don't have so you know what you're getting here. Okay, Oracle of the Shapeshifters, you will hear me talk about. Foxfire, the Kitsune Oracle, you will hear me talk about. Les Vampires, you will hear me talk about. I have that. I have all three of those decks, and we're going to be talking about them. Wild Wisdom of the Fairy Oracle, we will be talking about that. Magical Spell Cards, I don't have. I didn't feel a need to connect with those. Oracle of the Hidden Worlds, I do not have. I did not feel connected to that artwork. Oracle of Shadows and Light, I have and will be talking about. Oracle of the Mermaids, I have and we will be talking about. Because I love my self-affirmation deck, I do not have, so I cannot I can't include that in the breakdown. The Fairy Forest Oracle, I purchased this and I gifted it. I think I did a review in which everyone knows how disappointed I was in that deck and the artwork. I just could not connect with that deck. It didn't grow on me, so I gifted that. Beautiful Creatures Tarot, I had and I gifted. I just didn't... Oh, I'm sorry. Jasmine Beckett Griffith did that one. Excuse me. That was not Lucy. Sorry, that was an Amazon fail right there. Fairy Blessing cards. This was the other one. I do not have the Fairy Blessing cards, although Amy Brown did the artwork. It looks very pretty. Alice in Wonderland Oracle, I have. We're going to be talking about it. The Fairy Tale Oracle, I have. We will be talking about it. Blessed Bee cards, I have. We will be talking about it. Oracle of the Dragonfay, I have, and we will be talking about it. The Oracle Tarot, I do not have. Dragon Magic Affirmation deck, I do not have. I'm pretty sure I said Oracle of the Mermaids, right, guys? I think I hit them all, right? I think so, guys. Okay. Like I said, it was really hard to find a list, like a website, just her website with a list. So I don't know. But that's the Amazon. That's what you're going to find on the first Amazon search results page. So I want to talk about, I think you can tell by the way I'm doing this breakdown, like sometimes I love Lucy and sometimes she drives me nuts, but her decks are really good. And she's a wonderful witch and has done a lot of work in the community. So I have like major appreciation and respect for her. But sometimes I feel like she, like in the guidebook, sometimes I feel like we're making more of something than we need to be honest with you. And I really, yeah. So, and I'm feeling that way about this breakdown too. I'm like, it was so confusing to find that list and like just talk about these decks that I actually really want to talk about. So through the luck of many of you viewers, I actually have most of my Lucy Cavendish collection back. When I moved to Portland a couple years ago, I lost quite a few of them, and so many of you have been so lovely and done exchanges with me or sent me some of these decks, and so I want to say first and foremost to all of you, thank you. And this is in large part why I'm really excited to do this review. So I want to start, I kind of divided these up into categories. So where I want to start is Oracle of the Dragonfay and Wild Wisdom of the Fairy. Now the original backings, one of you sent me the French edition of this just so that I could have the original backings, which thank you so much. These are the original backings. I love them. The subsequent publishing has this as the backing. And I just don't like that. I like this kind of earthy wooden feel more than this one. But I just want to reference that for you so you can see these are the same deck. And if I recall correctly, some of the artwork, it may be Oracle of the Dragonfay where some of the artwork has been changed. But Selena Funic did the artwork for this one. The published by Blue Angel, as most of her decks are, you know, really nice tuck boxes. And I used to have the originals and second editions of all these, but as I said, I've lost quite a few of them. So let's start by talking about Wild Wisdom of the Fairy Oracle and Oracle of the Dragonfay. Oracle of the Dragonfay has multiple artists, but Selena Funic is a large part of these. And but Wild Wisdom of the Fairy Oracle is just Selena. So really beautiful. Very loving deck, very clear voice. This one's really easy to read with. A softer representation than how I typically experience the Fae, but very close to how I experience them. And I always tell this story that I drew Little Boy Blue when I was pregnant with Vincent before I knew. So this deck has special meaning for me because of that. But we get into a lot of fairy tale myth here too. And it's a really, really beautiful deck. Typical Blue Angel cardstock. I'll show you the guidebook really quickly. So nice, sturdy guidebook. You know, she does use reversals, so she has the whole About You section, then divinatory meanings, and then reversals. And I'm not going to show you every single one of the guidebooks because they're all very similar to this. So that's Wild Wisdom of the Fairy Oracle. This one and Oracle of the Dragonfay have a very similar feel, which is why I'm showing them together. And the artwork is different than we're about to get into a bunch of Jasmine Beckett Griffith. So, you know, if Jasmine's artwork doesn't speak to you, you may feel more connected to these. This is what happened. Oh my gosh, guys, I totally forgot. So Oracle of the Dragonfay, the original, had artwork by another artist that they took out, and they put Jimmy Manton's artwork in for the second publishing, whatever, second edition. Oh my gosh, this day, it's not best friends with me. And so there were different backings, if I remember correctly, and Jimmy Manton's artwork was not included. There are multiple artists in this one. It's why I find Wild Wisdom of the Fairy a little bit easier to work with in some respects, but I like the Fae beings that are present a little bit more in this one. So it really depends on what mood you're in, you know, as far as what you're going to be drawn to. So, and again, this does include Dragonfay, whereas Wild Wisdom of the Fairy is not specific to dragon and dragonkin. But you can see there's different artists. Raven Phelan did some of the artwork as well, which is always really exciting. We love her artwork. But I don't have the original one of this anymore. As I said, I used to. And it featured a different artist for like Lady of the New Buds. This is Jimmy Manton. I mean, Jimmy's artwork is just beautiful. But I have reviews for almost all of these decks. I even have a couple series with some of these decks on the channel from way back in the day if you want to see a much younger me. But this is Oracle of the Dragonfay. Of the two, so we're going to just keep it real here. Of the two, if I had to choose, I would go with Oracle of the Dragonfay because it's different from a lot of my other decks working with the Fae or with dragon energy. So if I had to choose between the two, I would go with Oracle of the Dragonfay. Do I think you need both? I think they both have their own voice. No, I don't think you need both. I think if you want both, go for it. But I think Oracle of the Dragonfay, I just resonated with a little bit more over time, for sure. But Wild Wisdom of the Fairy is really beautiful, so I'm in no way complaining about Wild Wisdom of the Fairy. So, coming back for the second installment of this video the next day, as you guys can see, as I said, of the two, over the years, Oracle of the Dragonfay has definitely been the one that's felt like the closest to my heart. And so if I had to choose between the two, I would go with Oracle of the Dragonfay. Wild Wisdom of the Fairy Oracle is definitely lovely in its own right as well. So that's what I have for the fairy, kind of straight up, just like fairy section of Lucy's decks. And now I'm going to get into the kind of more shapeshifter and Jasmine Beckett Griffith decks that she has done. There are two other Jasmine Beckett Griffith Lucy Cavendish decks that I'm putting in a different section of this video. I'm losing words right now. Anyhow, that I'm putting in a different section of this video, but for right now, we're going to focus on these decks here. So as you can see, these two are actually the same deck. I had the original Australian version, but then when I moved, I ended up losing it very, very sadly, and it broke my heart. However, one of you so very sweetly recently sent me the original, so I have it again, and I'm deeply, deeply thankful to the viewer who did that, and I just want to express my gratitude once again. If you're watching, my dear, thank you so much. So this was the US edition that was released after, and they have different backings. I'm sorry. If you're a frog person, you're probably gonna be like, oh no, I seriously love this one. I don't like this backing. I prefer the original. You guys know I'm an owl girl anyhow, and the original one has this beautiful backing. Now, the second printing has a few updated card images. This has a few older Jasmine images. That doesn't bother me at all. These two, the Oracle of Shadows and Light and Oracle of the Shapeshifters, were marketed for teenagers, but those of us who love Jasmine Beckett Griffith's artwork, really, it didn't stop us from purchasing the deck as adults. Some of the guidebook meanings do cater a little bit more towards issues that you may have predominantly in your teen years, but still valuable advice. And I think because almost all of Lucy's decks, and I should have said this at the beginning, have that title and then key phrases underneath. So you can definitely work with adjusting meanings and really reading intuitively just based on what's on the card itself. The cardstock is typical. I'm sorry, these were Beyond Words Simon Schuster for the updated publishing house, and same thing for Oracle of Shadows and Light. Just to clarify that. I have full reviews of all these decks, so I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty and compare and contrast between the two editions. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Oracle of the Shapeshifters. It remains one of my favorite Lucy Cavendish decks to this day. I actually did, back when I first had my son, a whole series on my kind of personal thoughts about working with each of the cards. And so you can access that on the channel. I don't know, I think there's 5 or 6 videos in that series. I may revisit that series someday. But anyhow, so here's some of the imagery. You either love pop art, lowbrow pop art, or you don't. I'm not going to lie to you. And Jasmine has a very unique style, and if it's not your style, then this is probably not a deck that you're going to enjoy working with. But if you like her artwork, you will love reading with these decks. They're very, very clear. Most of Lucy's decks are, the Fairy Forest being like my one exception of just like, I cannot work with this deck and the art is just awful for me. But these decks are very easy to read. They work really well with clients because the artwork is kind of a little spooky, but it's still super cute. People feel drawn to the imagery. I have clients of every age bracket, and everyone kind of across the board seems to like Oracle of the Shapeshifters. The idea with Oracle of the Shapeshifters is that you're working shamanically with spirit animal guides, but you're also working with mythological creatures, and you're working with beings that can shapeshift, hence the title, in any given situation. And it's about accessing multiple sides of ourselves, diverse aspects within ourselves, feeling comfortable with those parts of ourselves and uniting those parts of ourselves. So if that's something that you're looking to integrate and connect with in your life, then Oracle of the Shapeshifters is a beautiful deck for that. Now, Oracle of Shadows and Light was published prior to Oracle of the Shapeshifters, I believe. I love this backing. It's so beautiful, and I don't know why we went the frog way for the American edition of Oracle of the Shapeshifters, but like, this backing is so beautiful to me. I love to have it out on my altar. This has a little bit more of a border, and again, the focus here is the polarity of light and dark and the story with the gradations between. And this deck is going to give you clarity on both shadow work and light work, and feeling connected to that type of energy. The cardstock's a little bit nicer than Oracle of the Shapeshifters, at least for me. The cardstock in this one's a little bit nicer. It's held up really well over the years. So there's an example. Again, Jasmine Beckett Griffith did the artwork. The guidebook, again, teen focused, but still can work very well as, you know, you can apply it to your own life situation and your own experience. These two decks are very similar in that they are kind of, they're very shadow work friendly. They're definitely dealing, the artwork is a little more, I don't know what you would say, like darkly inclined. And we are dealing with this idea of spirit animals, kindreds, familiars, as well as the fae being, or the girl herself in the imagery. And even the Oracle of Shadows and Light isn't as focused on shapeshifters. You will see that there are spirit animals in this deck as well. So I've grouped them together. Now, do you need both? Honestly, I would purchase both. Like even if I wasn't reading professionally and I just read for myself and my own pleasure and I, you know, collected for myself, I would actually purchase both of these decks. I think they're absolutely worth it. I think they're each just different enough that you'll pull them out for different reasons when you go to read with them. And I think that they each have unique personalities, unique personalities and characteristics, making them separate, even though I am putting them in the same category of kind of shapeshifter, spirit animal energy. I do think it's worth it to purchase both. If you can only purchase one, I would go with Oracle of the Shapeshifters, just personally, because I really, I love that deck a lot. It was one of those decks that I just really felt so close to as soon as I connected with her, and she just really means a lot to me. So of the two, if I had to choose, it would be Oracle of the Shapeshifters, but I love Oracle of Shadows and Light, and I do not regret having her in my collection at all, and I have no plans to not have her in my collection. So now I'm going to go into two other of the Lucy and Jasmine decks. Excuse me, wait, there's three. Sorry about that. And now I'm going to talk about the three other Lucy and Jasmine decks. Each of these, we can't categorize them, but I do want to cover all the Jasmine decks at once in case you're only watching this to look at the Jasmine decks and see what you prefer. Sip of tea, a lot of talking. I'm going to start with the Fairy Tale Oracle. I believe I've done a review on the channel. If I haven't, I'm sure one of you will say, hey Racine, you thought you did, but you didn't, so thank you in advance. This deck I only use for relationship readings and insight into my shadow in regards to relationships. I've talked about this. Not that I use it for other things too. When I'm going through significant life changes, I will go to this deck, but I only use it for very specific things. This isn't a daily draw deck for me, like Oracle of the Shapeshifters or Oracle of the Dragonfay are daily draw decks for me. The Fairy Tale Oracle is super like, she will tell you how it is. It's kind of uncomfortable and a little bit yucky sometimes to have to look at those parts of yourself, hence shadow work. But it's very effective, it's very on point, and it's very, very truthful. I don't approach this deck in a lighthearted manner. I actually wasn't going to get this deck, and I ended up purchasing it, and I do not regret it, but she is a serious shot of truth serum. And I would say if you are new to tarot, if you're new to tarot and oracle decks, I wouldn't necessarily start here. And at the end of the video, you guys know I'm going to go through my top 5 and newbie recommendations, advanced reader recommendations. But the Fairy Tale Oracle is, she's freaking serious business. Now, originally I didn't get her because it felt like really light focused and kind of like, you know, grim fairy tale. It is grim fairy tale focused for a large part, but Lucy really did her research into the fairy tales, and you can see that in the guidebook. Now, I can't stand these backings as a side point, but some of you I know love those backings. Typical Blue Angel tuck box, typical cardstock. It's a typical Jasmine and Lucy deck. I want to be really clear about the guidebook for you, though. The guidebook can be hella confusing because she goes into the myth and you think she's going in a direction for her divinatory meanings, and then in the divinatory meanings sometimes it's the complete opposite of what she says in the story of the myth or the fairy tale. Now, as I said, this is a thing to know about Lucy's decks. Like, you actually have to spend time with the guidebook, or if you want to read the deck and honor the deck, you're not going to understand what the heck is going on in the deck itself. This guidebook especially can be very confusing. So I would recommend, this is a deck, you know, I always talk about building a relationship with your deck, spending time with your deck. It's what I'm known for in the community. I teach workshops on it. This is one of those decks that, like, you cannot just buy this deck and not pay attention to building a relationship with this deck. If you do that, you're definitely going to get a lot out of her. But she's like a very, very focused, she's almost like an herb to me. Like, it's like in having an herbal garden, and you go to specific herbs for specific reasons, but like, you don't put rosemary in something that's calling for time. Do you know what I mean? In a recipe, in like a spell working or any type of ritual work, or even in a recipe. Like, there are some herbs you just don't like cross, you just don't use in place of, right? There's like not a replacement herb sometimes. This is one of those decks. It solely wants to talk about relationships for me. It doesn't want to be bothered with other things. She wants to tell me the truth. She's going to go right into the wound. She clears out the disease, and then she's kind of done. She will also give me clarity on, as I said, shadow work, or in times of transition, maybe why I'm going through something or what it is that I don't want to learn. So this girl is a straight shooter, but she's a very specialized form of medicine. I almost get the feeling that, I love this image. Isn't that beautiful? I don't know. I feel like maybe Jasmine was in a place in like, or Lucy, someone seemed to be, there was something, it feels to me like there was, this is all just supposition on my part, guys, I should say. I don't have anything to, this is just me, you know, as I've worked with the deck, but I almost feel like someone was definitely in a time of transition when they made this deck as well, because I think it's really very focused on this very, very visceral type of honesty. So I can't really categorize this as like any of the other decks. She's very specific. I'm really, really glad I purchased her. I will not be getting rid of her. I treat her with a great deal of respect and honor. I don't fuck around with this deck. So those are my thoughts on the Fairy Tale Oracle. If you love Jasmine's artwork and you like Lucy as a deck author, you will not be disappointed in that deck. I thought I might have been, and I really was not at all. I was very, very much pleased with my deck, that experience with that deck. Because, you know, they had made a lot of decks, and I think there was a place where it felt like we have a lot of Jasmine and Lucy going on. And so I was reticent to pick it up because it also looked softer when I was looking at the, you know, stuff on Amazon. But it is not. It's a very serious deck. Okay, now I'm going to go to Les Vampires. I posted a review on this. I used to have a signed copy. I lost that very sadly, but I do have the deck again, and I'm very, very thankful for that. And I really love, I love this deck. Not my favorite backing of all time. I have a review of this deck on the channel as well. I'll try to remember to go ahead and put links in the description box, guys, but honestly, sometimes that keeps me from uploading, so if I forget, you can just search the channel and those reviews will pop up. So this, as you can imagine, it's a shadow work deck. Not just shadow work, but it is shadow work focused. It focuses on the myth of vampires. Lucy walks you through the whole journey of like how she created it and the voice of the vampires themselves. It is a wonderful deck for shadow work, for really looking at your own wounds and bring them into the light for integration. It's also a really great deck for, I love this image, for learning, I don't want to say learning, opening up to self-acceptance and really embracing who you are and your, you know, what makes you different, letting your freak flag fly. She really encourages you to embrace that. And this is a deck that I have gifted to friends who are maybe struggling with understanding themselves and looking for something that's going to help them feel, you know, affirmed and empowered. And this is definitely that deck. She's so beautiful. I really love a lot of the imagery in this deck. And I find the borders to be not the most irritating that Lucy and Jasmine have done together. So that's really greatly appreciated. Yeah, so this is the Le Vampire Oracle. As I said, please spend your time with the guidebook. Please pay attention to the guidebook. It's going to pay off. It's totally going to be worth it for you to do so. I do not group this deck in with Shapeshifters and Shadow and Light. She has a very different feel to me, and I think she's unique unto herself. I would definitely purchase her. I'm not going to do a compare and contrast because they're totally different. So to me, if you're going to build your Lucy collection, both of these decks should be in that collection. So now I'm going to talk about what has become my all-time favorite. I'm just going to say it right here, right now. My all-time favorite Lucy deck. Lucy and Jasmine deck as well. I love the Wonderland stories. I am not saying that Lewis Carroll was a good person. I'm not supporting the choices that he made in his life. I grew up, excuse me, I should have cleared my throat. I grew up actually reading the stories, not just watching the Disney movies. I didn't really watch the Disney movies because I grew up in an environment where we weren't watching those kind of movies. I read the actual stories, and I have I can be that bitch when it comes to talking about the Wonderland world and kind of the way that it gets dumbed down for mass consumption now. And I was a little reticent when this deck first came out because I was definitely worried that Lucy was going to go in this really, kind of like, ooh, magical fairy way that sometimes Alice in Wonderland gets interpreted. It's a fantastical world, but it's actually quite haunting, and fucked up, to be honest. And that's kind of why I love the stories, both the stories. But Lucy did not disappoint. Can I just say that to you? I don't have the guidebook in the box at the moment because this is a traveling deck. This deck goes with me everywhere. I read with this deck is on my main desk. I read like probably 8 times out of 10, if you've purchased a reading from me, this deck's going to be my clarifying oracle deck. I fucking love this deck so much. I have come to love, like, she is like in my top 5. I can't live without this deck. Lucy actually read the books. She had read the books prior to the guidebook, and why I was wishing I had the guidebook up here, but I don't, unfortunately, is because she actually quotes from the guidebook. She gets into, in the guidebook meanings, very nuanced aspects of the story. She's very true to the storylines. And I believe, if I remember right, in the intro, she says she actually travels, or there was a time when she was traveling and she carried the stories with her and she was reading them like either in the morning or at night, and she was like very connected to Alice's storyline. So there's a real, I really love that guidebook. This is my favorite Lucy deck. I'm just going to be totally upfront with you there. Also, there are no borders. I don't like borders. I just don't. That hasn't changed for me. The guidebook is one of the easier ones to read, believe it or not, from Lucy's guidebooks. And it does lend itself very well to issues of self-worth, shadow work, discovering who you are, understanding who you've become. And this deck is spot on as a clarifier or as a standalone deck to read with. She just will go. She just sings for me. I love her so much. I just do. I can't say enough. I use this deck almost every single day. It's right up there with Tarot of Vampires and the Isis Oracle for me. They knocked it out of the park with this one, and I was so nervous because I was just so nervous because of my own, how do I want to say it? My own attachment to Alice. Actual Alice, not the bastardized story that gets told, today. So I could talk about this deck for hours. if you love Alice in Wonderland, whether you love the Disney version or the actual stories themselves, oh, sorry, this deck does use reversals. This is the only deck that I use reversals with, by the way, because they're actually spot on. Those reversals are real. When they show up reversed, like in this deck, I actually do need to see it. What is my deck doing right now? That's interesting. Okay. Like I said, she has a personality. She's super clear. She's super upfront. She does not pull any punches. While this isn't my favorite deck backing, while this is not my favorite deck backing ever, I actually understand it for Alice in Wonderland. And so I'm okay with it. Like, I don't mind it. It's on my desk. As I said, it's one of the first decks that I look at every time I sit down to read. This is my recording and my reading desk. And that deck I fucking love that deck. I can't even, I just love that deck. So if I have to make a choice, and I were to say to you, I'm gonna do a rundown at the end, but that is my number one Lucy deck that I cannot live without. If I had to let go of everybody else, I wouldn't be happy, but I would survive. But I wouldn't survive without Alice in Wonderland Oracle. She's a standalone. She's a star. Brief note about the Fairy Forest. I purchased it. I gifted it. I did a review. I was pretty honest in that. It's not one of my favorites. So I just grabbed the guidebook really quick from downstairs just to show you. You know, it's not the most wordiest of hers, but it's very, you're going to get a wealth of information. And like I said, very, very focused on, you know, inner work, inner realms, and connecting with aspects of yourself. So there is that. Now I'm going to move on to the last three. This video is so long. For those of you who make it, I give you such props. Okay. What do I want to do? Oh, I had just spoken really briefly about the Fairy Forest as well. So as I said, the Fairy Forest just was really a deck that it didn't resonate with me. It just didn't resonate. So, but I did recently purchase the Blessed Bee set of cards by Lucy Cavendish. Jane Starr Wiles did the artwork. And it's very much about, you know, Celtic witchery, I would say, in that focus on your life. And it's like every card is a blessing or a prayer. And so when you draw it, that's like the blessing that you're receiving for the day. I'm just going to show you that. I really have struggled with this deck, and I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I have not found a way to, I love the backing though, but I have not found a way to work with her. It doesn't, it's almost like an affirmational deck, and yet it doesn't quite feel that way, and so it's hard to connect with her. At least it has been for me. And so this is definitely one that I don't think you have to have in your Lucy collection, but the art, like, this is a gorgeous image, right? And so I had kind of thought for a little while, well, I'll just use them on my altar, kind of like maybe a seasonal or a blessing for each Sabbath or Espit, but it just hasn't really worked that way for me. And I've really wanted to connect with her. Like, look at how beautiful that image is. This is the reason why I bought the deck. I mean, she's gorgeous. She's fucking gorgeous. Like, what else can I say? She's absolutely beautiful. But I just have not been able to connect with this deck. It's been really, really difficult. And so this one, I haven't found a way to work with her yet. But as I said, the artwork is just stunning. It's stunning. I want to be able to work with this deck. So this may be one that I put on my list of, like, you know, I think we all have that list where we're like, I'm either going to connect with this or I'm going to gift it. And this is on that list for me of like, all right, it's connection time or it's gifting time. So the next deck I'm going to talk about by Lucy is the Foxfire, the Kitsune Oracle. Let me see. Artwork is by Meredith Dillman, and this is all focused on the myth of the Kitsune, who are the guardians of Foxfire. One of my lovely, lovely friends actually kind of got me to end up buying this. And I have to say, honestly, a large part of it is because of the card backings. This is like one of my favorite card backings ever. It's so beautiful. And the artwork in this deck is lovely. Really lovely artwork. And I know that I'm going to connect with her. I just haven't, it hasn't happened yet, but I know the time is coming. Like, this is a solid deck that I won't be getting rid of, but I haven't quite found, we haven't found our sweet spot together yet. We haven't really connected. So this is one of those decks that's on my, I really want to connect and get to know this deck better list. I love that there are no borders. It's typical Blue Angel cardstock, as every deck that I've shown you here has been. But just, it's really, really beautiful. It's unique unto itself. This is not like, you can't get this experience with any other deck that I've shown you in her series. So if you are drawn to the imagery, if you're drawn to Kitsune, if you're drawn to that myth and that beautiful realm and world, then I would say, and also if you're someone who's drawn to the element of fire, then, you know, this is a deck that you're going to want to play around with. It's just like, look at even the color inside the tuck box. I love. It's a beautiful deck, and so I think it's unique unto itself, and if you're drawn to it, you definitely, yeah, I'm encouraging you to purchase her for sure. Final deck. Oh my god. And I guess technically I should have put her with Wild Wisdom of the Fairy because they're both by Selena Funic, the artwork, but this is Oracle of the Mermaids. The reason why I did not put it with Wild Wisdom of the Fairy is because that's a Fae deck and this is a deck of mermaids. They're different mythology. They don't belong in the same area to me. So, as you guys know, I believe I did a review. I love this deck. I really love this deck. I do not use this deck all the time. I use this deck seasonally, predominantly in the spring and the summer, and occasionally in the fall. This is the card backing. The artwork is really, really beautiful. I am not someone who's drawn to mermaids. I'm not one of those girls. I love the ocean. I don't experience mermaids as being these sweet little, you know, creatures. Their myths are actually pretty epic and insane. So, and I think Lucy bridges the gap there with creating an accessible deck. It's not too dark, but it is also in alignment with the myths of mermaids. And if you want a deck that's both shadow and light, this deck absolutely holds that spectrum really beautifully. This is also a wonderful clarifying deck. This is a very chatty deck. She likes to read with others. She likes to be in readings. She loves to have conversations with clients. She's the chatty Cathy, very much so. So I would say if you're a reader, you may also appreciate having this in your collection. The artwork is really beautiful too, and so it pulls people in. You know, clients who get readings enjoy looking at the artwork as well. It's a really, really lovely deck. So if you feel drawn to the artwork and the imagery, or if you're someone who loves mermaids, I don't think you will be disappointed in this deck at all. This is a keeper. When I had moved to Portland, I had lost her, and one of you lovely viewers sent me her again, and I was so thankful. I actually had her in Portland, which was really special because Portland, Maine is right on the water. And there was something really beautiful about working with her at the ocean. And so I really got to bond with this deck there. And yeah, my love for her has deepened over the years. Like I said, she's a very specific deck. I think Lucy creates very specific decks. And, you know, you'll turn to those for very specific reasons. And this is one of those decks. So last deck on the list is Oracle of the Mermaids with artwork by Selena Funic. And it does not disappoint at all. Whew. Okay, guys, we did it. We made it through 3 prolific deck authors, and I'm going to go down my top 5 now. My top 5 Lucy decks: Alice the Wonderland Oracle, Les Vampire Oracle, Oracle of the Shapeshifters, the Fairy Tale Oracle, and it's really, really hard. because I love Oracle of Shadows and Light, and I love Oracle of Mermaids. I guess I'll put Oracle of Mermaids there in my top 5, but Oracle of Shadow and Lights is a very close number 6. That is my list of like, yes, I must. These are must-haves in my collection. A really good start for a beginner, I would say Oracle of Shadows and Light. Wild Wisdom of the Fairy is wonderful for beginners. And Oracle of the Mermaids as well can be a nice entry point into working with Oracle decks. So I definitely think you can't go wrong with those. Seasoned readers will enjoy working with the Fairy Tale Oracle, the Wonderland Oracle, and I kind of feel like Oracle of the Dragonfay because you got to spend a little time with her. So yeah, that's like my breakdown for Lucy decks. As I said, Lucy has a very specific voice, and she does very powerful decks, and really, and for, you know, for the most part, decks that really I've connected to really intimately. And there's an aspect of the shapeshifter in me that I feel like Lucy has been able to really speak to palpably, and I find that really refreshing. Those who identify as shapeshifters, we don't always get to talk about it that much, so it's wonderful when someone makes a deck that, or in a series of decks that really speak to, you know, being just that little bit different, if you know what I mean. So that is the Lucy Cavendish breakdown, guys. We did it. Yay! Anyhow, thank you all for hanging in there. I'm sending you so much love and many blessings. If you want me to break down any other decks or compare and contrast, let me know in the comments below, and I will add that to my list. I've really been enjoying doing this, so I'd be happy to do a few more while we're kind of in this mode. I hope you're all doing well. I'm sending you so much love and many blessings. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.